People need to understand the difference between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation. For example, it is not cultural appropriation for me to wear kimono, it's something that everyone wears, and you don't really have to earn something to wear it. Wearing it is cultural appreciation. On the other hand, I would never wear a headdress. In many Native American cultures, a headdress is something you have to earn to wear, wearing it will be cultural appropriation. People who harped on others for appreciating another culture forgot that most of the items that they use are not founded by the country, racial identity they belong to. It's like globalization doesn't exist. If people start seriously barring the use of another ethnicity's items to conform to some people's sensibilities, we're fucked. I remember a black NBA player was trying to roast an Asian player on Twitter for having dreads or something like that. The Asian player was like, "Thank you so much for your explanation. I now see how important it is not to culturally appropriate." He included a picture of the black player's tattoos, which happened to include Asian symbols. Hilarity ensued, of course. I don't think this is unpopular off the internet. People in Japan are known to give kimonos to families as gifts. I should know, as we've been given several. You'd be interested to find most people making the complaints are more often not even Japanese, or the culture they claim is being appropriated. They just want Twitter points, bro. I don't care if this is unpopular or not. I have immense appreciation for you. You're putting something so simply that I never could articulate. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. People need to ignore Twitter, and a large part of Reddit too. It really is funny to see so many complaints about the stupidity of claiming cultural appropriation. It's no secret this is mostly done by young white people, and that's Reddit's core demographic. The people bitching about it make up this website. The latest thing I've seen online is that it's disrespectful to say an animal in a video or something like that is your spirit animal, as they claim it is appropriating Native American culture, completely ignoring that fact that many Celtic cultures had spirit animals as well. I feel like, a lot of the time, it's actually white people who call out other white people for cultural appropriation. You can actually find so many interviews on YouTube with actual Japanese, Chinese people, where they are asked for their opinion on non-native people wearing the traditional clothing, e.g. kimonos, and they're all very enthusiastic and happy that their culture is recognized elsewhere. Edit. Grammar. Honestly, it's Americans. Butthurt people are gonna get their butts hurt regardless. I'm Indian but from an Austro-Asiatic tribe from the northeast, and an Australian friend of mine in my uni wore an indigenous dress from my tribe and she rocked it. Guess who got offended by her wearing it? The other two Australian students, and not the ones who actually belong to the dress that's being appreciated. Third-party butthurtedness is a real bitch. The biggest problem today is people being offended on behalf of other people. It's weird. This thing is so American, laughing face. Yeah, I have dreadlocks and I'm white and here nobody give a single fuck. It's the opposite. A lot of black people told me that they're neat LMAO. I find cultural appropriation a silly argument. Let people wear what they want to wear. How I personally frame this issue is whether a person is mocking a culture. Cultural mocking would be donning a traditional minority pattern and making racist stereotypical gestures. Cultural mocking is bad most of the time. If someone is wearing the traditional pattern because they like the aesthetic, that is perfectly okay. Honestly, there's a big difference between enjoying a culture's food, clothing, music, hairstyles, etc., and doing something utterly disrespectful to one's culture. You're not culturally appropriating, you're being an asshole. For example, Logan Paul in Japan. He purchased things meant to be worn, but his actions were that of being a straight-up asshole. A good example of liking a culture is going to a powwow to participate with permission, yet someone will scream, "That guy's white, he's appropriating." In that case, the person screaming is being an asshole. The whole argument is meant to divide a melting pot world for political gain. What most people don't realize is that cultural appropriation in and of itself is not an inherently negative thing. It's just the word that describes the process whereby a person or people from one culture adopt a cultural practice of another, and it happens all the time without it being in any way problematic. International sports, for example, wouldn't be possible without cultural appropriation, because all those countries didn't all invent football independently, now did they? It only becomes problematic when it's a culturally dominant group benefiting from taking significant cultural practices from non-dominant groups, while the non-dominant group gets exploited or even erased. Cultural appropriation can even be harmful to the receiving group that adopts the practice. For instance, during the heights of colonialism, the colonizers forced the cultural practices on the colonized in the shape of language, etiquette, forms of government, architecture, etc., again for the goal of exploitation and erasure. That's also cultural appropriation. That's when cultural appropriation isn't just a neutral mechanism of cultural exchange, it becomes a tyrannical practice. Was looking for this comment. Cultural appropriation has essentially become a bad word, and people don't realize it's just a scholarly term for something that happens between cultures. Wearing a kimono to a festival as a white American is cultural appropriation. So is people of Japan adopting Western cultural items. Japanese curry is a spin on British curry, which is adopted from Indian curry. Both of these are cultural appropriation that can both be considered neutral or positive. Now, if an American was mass-producing Japanese ceremonial clothing as a fashion item and cutting into the economy or religious practices of the people the clothing belonged to, then we start seeing the negative side of cultural appropriation that needs to be addressed.